Here. I'd like to introduce Bruce Blackwell. He's the expert on all the FireSmart. If you're not sure what that is, he'll definitely let you know during this. Also, if you haven't filled out the sheet, if you could do that before you leave, please, just give us some information and you can get in contact with us if you need anything. Thank Tyler for setting everything up. Jen McGowan, who's our emergency coordinator, is not here. She's the big reason why all this goes on. She's done a lot of work before this, got a lot of money and funding for the FireSmart program, so I'll let Bruce go on from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll do well, we've had more people here to the other workshops. We had little low attendance, must be Stanley Cup. Toronto's playing, I don't know. Anyway, so it's great that you attended tonight. I'm going to talk to you about FireSmart and trying to sort of get people thinking about what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing around our homes. Today I had the lovely and entertaining afternoon with the fair weather strata to look at their homes and tell them all what they need to do in terms of their homes and fire smarting. So I think we're having some impact here on the island, but the bottom line is you go away more empowered and more knowledgeable about wildfire as it relates to your home, development on the island, and the things that you might want to think about in terms of protecting your residents and your family. I have a background, I started fighting fires way back when in 1979. Worked for the provincial rappel team, sliding on ropes out of helicopters and having lots of fun and adventure, and I'm lucky I'm still alive, but that's another story. But it was fun, and that's what got me interested in fire. So I went to school, studied fire as an undergrad, and got a forestry degree, and then decided I really liked it and did a master's degree. And I've been consulting for, well, over 30 years now. Largely working in the fire space, particularly since about 2002, 2003. After the fires then, I worked for Gary Philman and helped him write the Firestorm Overview report that sort of set out a bunch of recommendations. And since that time, I've been doing a lot of community wildfire protection planning, house FireSmart work. I do all kinds of assessments for all kinds of businesses now. Yesterday, I was at Brook Creek Lodge looking at how they protect their infrastructure. Last year, I worked for NRC Canada looking at their observatories in Victoria, and in particular because there's some big fire issues related to these multi-million-dollar research facilities. I worked in watersheds, utilities. I'm doing some work for BC Hydro. So I've seen all kinds of applications of what we're going to talk about in terms of basic fire smarting tonight, and how you think about fire and how you think about protecting both life and property. So we know that, actually this can now say 2018, this was a presentation developed last year, so I'm just repeating what I did last year, but we've had lots of big fire seasons in British Columbia and really across North America, and even into Europe and other parts of the world have been experiencing significant wildfire seasons, significant losses that have impacted the economic framework, social and environmental framework of communities really around the world. And what that's starting to emphasize is that we need greater consideration of and due diligence with respect to wildfire risk and the wildland-urban interface. The wildland-urban interface, if you don't know what that is, it's where the forest meets the community. But there's also lots of what we call intermix, which is islands of homes within the forest. I would suggest that Bowen, as a community, is much more on the intermix side than it is the actual true interface. So when you think about the homes that burn in California and all that, there are thousands of homes being exposed to ember showers coming out of the forest, landing on the homes, starting the homes on fire. Here, there's a difference in that the fuel is right next to your home, you're surrounded by it, and it has bigger implications for protecting your home and or evacuation and egress as it relates to getting out of a fire situation. The other thing to be thinking about is that these larger fires, and when I say larger, I'm going to say 20 to 40 hectares, if we get a fire that big, is going to put a smoke column up. It's going to put a lot of embers up, and those embers stay alighted depending on relative humidity, temperature, wind speed, and they flow out of the smoke column and drop somewhere outside of where the fire started. And if there's material that is vulnerable to fire, so if it's wood structures, wood roofing, or even fuel on the ground, those embers will start new fires ahead of the fire front. So the two big things that we're looking at right now in terms of FireSmart is hardening your actual structure so it's not vulnerable to fire, but also hardening the vegetation around your structure so that it doesn't catch fire and then start your structure on fire. So that's really, it's about the vegetation around your home, it's about your home proper. We're interested in two things. In the interior, we talk about fires caused by lightning, lots of big fires caused by that. On the coast here, we don't get as much lightning, we do get lightning fires, but really our bigger issue in communities like Bowen is somebody's house starting on fire in the middle of summer and that house fire spreading to the forest. Okay, and then that engages the whole forest. Very difficult situation because once a house fire gets going, the heat generation of the house starts the forest on fire, overwhelms the fire department, the fire takes off. So it's not only a lightning strike. The other big issue is we have more and more visitors to this island and tourism in general in this region. Lots of people not from this country, lots of people that don't understand the fire risk during the summer, doing silly things, starting fires which impact homes, communities, whatever. So there's a lot of human-caused fires that have happened over the last 2 decades. So what we really want to look at is, we want to look at the risk to your home. So we want to look at, one, the probability of fire, and the consequence. How do we reduce this probability side? That's what we're really focused. We know that we don't want to burn your house. We know that we don't want to see a house fire burn a house. So we're really focused on how do we reduce the probability of a fire starting or occurring on your property and then damaging your home. And really, there's a whole probability spectrum here. I would have 20 years ago said that we were kind of in a low probability, high consequence environment here. But I'm saying now that this is more a moderate probability environment and a high consequence. So then we have to look at, okay, well, what are we going to do to reduce that risk to the home in terms of burning? You have the option of do nothing, and historically that's what most people have done. They've lived in this environment and felt comfortable because there hasn't been a lot of fire around them, and they haven't ever worried about fire in a big way. But the last few years, with all the television media coverage, Fort McMurray, fires in BC, fires in California, Australia, and other places, have really awakened a new awareness of fire, I think, throughout the country. And so you're seeing that we're pushing more to people doing more and more on this active intervention side to protect their property. The reality is, if we get a big fire here, you have one fire department that really is set up to fight 1 or 2 house fires. If we get multiple homes engaged, very unlikely that we can stop those losses of those multiple fires. So this is typical of the forest interface in British Columbia. This is on Cortez Island. These are houses that are classic to what you see on Bowen. Lots of wood structures, wood piles right next to their home. And all of these houses, I would say, if the forest was engaged in fire, would be very difficult to protect and probably would be lost. So why? Well, we have this ember shower event where we have these kinds of pieces of forest material. They start on fire, they get put up in the smoke column, they land on vulnerable roofing or wood parts of the structure is burned. The other problem we have is we have lots of homes that are very close to the forest edge. Forest edge catches on fire, starts homes on fire, and here's a whole block taken down because the fire from one house spreads to the next house, to the next house. And this is the kind of fire event that has taken out a lot of homes in California. We lost 226 homes in BC last year. Same thing. There were multiple ignitions to multiple homes all at the same time. So this is just a graphic to pick spotting. Fire starts, puts up embers. These embers, depending on wind, relative humidity, and the size and type of fire, travel a certain distance and then fall down into a vulnerable area of forest or homes and starts that area on fire. We've had ember showers in BC that have carried embers as far as 9 kilometers. We usually plan on the basis of 2 kilometers. In Australia, they've seen ember showers that have gone 25 kilometers. So it really depends on the fuel, the wind, and a whole host of factors. 2 kilometers is relatively conservative, but Kelowna in 2003 went as far as 9 kilometers. Went from basically the end of the municipality almost all the way up to the airport and started another fire. So we can have long distance spotting. Okay, so I'm going to show a couple of videos. And the first video is really about what is a forest fire, what contributes to its behavior, and why we get these fires. So this is
MPD Site 1, Camera 2.
Ridge in the Kootenays. You can see it's not a significantly dense forest, and you can see there's a lot of green on the ground. When I first saw this slide, I actually didn't think it was going to burn. I thought, how can all this green alder burn here? Because it's got a high foliar moisture content, lots of spacing between the trees. But the interesting point is you're going to see some smoke come in and wind. It's going to drop embers, which is going to show you the spotting effect. These embers are going to start fires all along inside the picture. And then you're going to see this tree basically heat up to the point where it gives off moisture and then gas, and then the gas is going to turn to flame. And you're going to get a good idea of what kind of fire behavior we can get, particularly this is not a very dense forest. So imagine a higher density cedar component with lots of fuel here on Bowen Island. You're also going to watch that once it's burned out, you'll see an interesting phenomenon in the bottom, and I'll tell you more about the stand and its history afterwards. But there's an instant camera here that shows the flaming combustion in the fire, and the temperatures measured at this were 900 degrees. So, again, remember, it's not really a dense forest. So there's the smoke. Now you're going to start to see the embers. There's an ember lit there. There'll be one down in here, and you'll see 2 spots. There it is. And another one in behind. And those are embers carried by the wind. They drop in. And now the fuel on the ground will start to burn. Now that tree, you'll see, will start to gasify. It'll start to put off steam, drive the moisture off, and then eventually gas that's going to bust. And that's there's the first part of the steam, and now it's gasifying. In a minute, it's going to catch up. And this is typical fire behavior in British Columbia. Just differing degrees depending on moisture, wind, temperature, all those kind of things. And you can see what happens. So the forest that really is that dense. This is a plant fire. So this was lit in May, where the drug code, which is a measure of how high it was 250. The drug code here in Bowen last year was 900.
The higher the number,
The higher the number, the
worse?
drier. So the key thing you're going to see is that there's a lot of fuel down on the ground here. What happened to the stand is this was attacked by non-pine beetle in 1983. The spring was in 2006, and all that fuel under the ground. And the point of this exercise is one, to give you a flavor for fire, but to show you how important surface fuel is. This surface fuel, dry, dead pine beetle, actually drove the fire up into the grounds, even though it wasn't that dense. So this fuel on the ground, if you're thinking about your home, is really the most important first step in trying to mitigate the possibility of fire moving into the trees. If you clean up the surface, chances are it's not going to go into the ground as easily as it's spread along the surface. The other thing is you want to raise the crowns of the trees so that it's harder for that flame to move up into the actual base of the ground. So we can stop the video. Now we'll go to another video. Tyler's doing a spectacular job here of running the videos because he does way better. So this is a video done by Disaster Safety in the US, and it's simulating an ember shower on a home that's got all kinds of different materials, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute. So this has wood roofing, vulnerable to fire, has all kinds of vegetation on the roof, vulnerable to fire, and there's different construction materials, and we're going to show you what's vulnerable, what's not vulnerable. We're also going to show you, so this is them preparing the material that's going to burn when they blow it onto the house. So this is organic matter that's going to be ignited, and they're going to blow it as an ember shower. And this actually very realistically simulates an ember shower as we get in a real forest fire. So they're going to put mulch and vegetation around the house, and you're going to see that this bark mulch and these plants actually burn at the base of the house. And in Fort McMurray, most of the houses were lost because of the landscaping that was right beside the houses. So we changed the FireSmart zoning to go from 0 to 10 meters to 1 to 1.5 so people don't put that material around their house. So these are the embers. This is like 10,000 embers per minute, and you'll start to see different parts of the house. So 100 fan rate, 10 to 20 miles per hour. Not uncommon in a fire event. So here you can see it's affecting the landscaping, and these the ember shower is completely engulfing the house. Just to point out, if you had a sprinkler on the roof, the sprinkler covered the footprint of the house, it would reduce the relative humidity with the moisture, and those embers wouldn't affect the house. So that's why we talk about sprinkling. So the gutters melt because they're vinyl. The landscaping, you can see it's all on fire, and this eventually impacts burning the house itself. So the asphalt shingle roof is what's called a rated roof. It's Class A. It doesn't burn. The wood roofing, the shake roof, does burn. So you're going to see here the difference between the rated roofing and the unrated roofing. This is hardy board, which is a cement wood composite. It doesn't burn. So the untreated wood shakes are vulnerable to spots, and they're going to cause internal ignition in the house. The vegetation we talked about, it's dry, flammable, and it's now lapping up the siding. So it's gone, that vegetation that was burning down here has now caused the vulnerable siding that wasn't FireSmart to burn. And this is the most interesting part, is if you don't have proper screens in your vents, in your roof, the embers go into your attic and they set your attic on fire, or they go through, the heat of the flame goes through your windows. And there'll be a couple of really good examples here. So the cement fiber siding is only slightly damaged. That's the FireSmart resistant material I talked about. So here you can see that the fire's had minimal effect on that siding. So in these fire-prone environments, we recommend rated roofing. We recommend going to hardy board as the proper siding. So here's the screen, the attic gable, the end vent, and the embers penetrated at 1/8 inch. Usually the recommended size is 3 millimeters. So the embers get into the attic. If there's fiberglass in there or other insulation, it all starts on fire. And here you see a fiberglass window screen that allows ember penetration, moves right into the main living space of the house. So these embers can get everywhere there's vulnerability in the house. So this is not a double pane glass window. It gets in on the vinyl, in through and moves into the house. So there's all these points of entry if the home isn't FireSmart. Okay, back to PowerPoint. Have I enlightened you? Any questions at this stage? Have I gone too fast? Okay. So we'll go back to PowerPoint.
You're there?
Yes.
You're there.
Okay, next slide. There we go. Next slide. So, we have lots of resources to suppress fires. You have a fire department here. But what's happened in the last couple of years is we had so much fire that we really haven't had the capability to fight all the fires that we've had. And typically what happens in BC is the fire load builds through the end of July, and all the resources are gradually pulled to the interior, and the coast is seen as a place where we really don't have a lot of fire, so we don't need the same resources. And if we got a fire, a significant fire, on an island like Bowen or in the Lower Mainland or on Vancouver Island, chances are we don't have the same response that we might have early in the fire season. In fact, it could take quite a while to get resources here. So this is just to demonstrate that some stratas that I've been involved with are prepared with their own water sources at this stage. So that Vortex area, they've got a tank that they can hook up a pump, a hose, and they can actually start to engage in fire suppression before the fire department gets there or before the protection branch can get there. You never know what that fire response is going to be. So again, another reason to make your home fire smart and limit the possibility of a fire starting on your property and moving to other people's property. You're not only protecting your property, you're protecting really the whole island. So really, the focus of FireSmart is to help communities mitigate or reduce that risk that I talked about, and it's talking about adapting communities to be more wildfire resilient. And really, you can't anymore in the current conditions that we've had rely entirely on government to prevent these types of fires. We don't have enough resources, and the conditions that these fires are starting in are too difficult for us to control. So the more you fire smart your house, the larger the greater the chance that you're going to protect your home from being lost in a wildfire. So the two main avenues are really change the vegetation type, density, and setback from your building, change the structure to reduce vulnerability. So in this case, the house is up above here. This is stored with a whole pile of firewood. There's lots of entry for those embers. This wood pile starts, the whole home's gone. Don't put the wood pile in your house, next to your house, or on your deck or anything. But I can drive around Bowen Island right now, and there's wood piles around everywhere in or right on the house. I know after today that some people that came to the lecture last year have actually moved their wood piles. So it does make a difference to talk about this stuff. The other thing is any other hazardous material, propane, or anything that can burn, you don't want immediately adjacent to your house. The propane tanks are bombs. They should be 10 meters away from your house, and you should have proper copper piping underneath the ground to your propane tank. I was doing some workshops 2 weeks ago in the Bulkley Valley dealing with ranchers, and one of the guys said to me, I got a bunch of ammunition in my wood shed right next to my house. Is that a hazard? Well, what happens to ammunition when it catches on fire? It's not a good story. So anything like explosives, ammunition, propane, wood, any of those things right next to your house are not good things. They're dangerous for the fire department, they're dangerous for you, and you should store them away from the home in a safe place. So really the concept of FireSmart is we start in this 10 meter zone, we work outwards from 10 to 30, 30 to 100. So if your property is forested out 100 meters, depending on the condition of the vegetation, you may want to do more and more vegetation management as you go out the boundary. But the real focus is get the structure hardened off, make that 10 meters. 10 meters is 30 feet. It's not very big. It's like just around this room. If I can make the vegetation limited inflammability, not a lot of trees, not a lot of cedar, not a lot of hedging, my house has got a lot better chance of surviving. So basically, we want to prevent that fire moving from the forest to the building or the home to the forest, so spreading from the building to the building home to the forest. So really this is very practical stuff. It's not hard to do. So here's that 10 meter zone around this house. This work I'm doing in Brew Lodge is all about exactly this. We're starting from here, they're removing all the small diameter trees in and around here, then they're moving out to this zone and this zone, and they're doing it progressively over the next few years as their budget allows. The other thing I haven't talked much about is evacuation and egress. Many of the homes on this island have one way in, one way out. I don't know how many of you saw the videos at Fort McMurray, but evacuation has become very top of mind in terms of the ability to evacuate during these corridors being impacted by fire and having alternatives. You don't want one way in and one way out. You want another way out in the event that you're cut off from fire in your primary access. The other thing in thinking about this is a fire truck going to come down this road if the road is engulfed in fire, and are they going to come and think about saving your home? Not likely. So the biggest issue in the homes that I looked at in Fairweather today was not the homes themselves, but the evacuation and egress. That's probably their biggest issue. and they need to do something about thinning the trees roadside and providing safe access in and out for the fire department and an alternate evacuation route for the residents. So, structure protection again. You look at all these houses and you go, why did these all burn? They're far away from the forest edge. This was the Fort McMurray scenario, but they had landscaping, trees, building materials that were all not spotting resistant, and the fire started here. It went to that house, all the way around through the neighborhood. So remember, it's contact to contact. If you're building to building, chances are once one building's on fire, you got multiple buildings going. The fire department has not got the resource capability to deal with multiple buildings. Unless you guys are turning magical tricks that I don't know about.
Right.
Okay, good, good. They're really good, but they're not that good. So, anyway, the challenges of implementing this. Well, first, you've got to be aware of the risk. What is the risk to your building? Historically, the biggest problem has been lack of engagement. If I'm not going to have a fire, it's not going to happen to me. The cost. Removing one tree might cost you, a big tree, might cost you $1,000. You really want to do that. How do you dispose of that material once you cut it down and you create all that biomass? Well, you came to this lecture, you get a free pickup from Bowen Island because you signed up on that sheet. And that's why you probably came here today, because you want free disposal, I know. Okay, there's also the perceived actions required to be FireSmart. Are they, you know, like one we have to do, is it really onerous? You're not gonna change the construction materials of your house once it's built unless you're doing something like re-roofing, but that's not a bad option when you're ready to roof. If you know you got a vulnerable roof, change the roofing. And there isn't a lot of funding opportunities, but the government after last year has actually made funding available to residents. So there is some funding available to do some work on private property. So I've talked about a lot, this 10-meter fuel-free zone around the home. Ensure that the direct flame contact with the building and vegetation cannot occur. So it reduces the potential for radiant heat. So once that vegetation ignites or your home ignites, it gives off radiant heat. If you're 10 meters away from the vegetation or the house is away from the vegetation, the heat dissipates in that pathway from the house to the vegetation. That's why 10 meters is important. You want to avoid vegetation such as juniper, cedar, or bush hedges. Cedar, well, juniper, for example, is gasoline. When you light up juniper, it black smoke. It's really bad stuff. And cedar is not far behind. Cedar will burn in October on these islands. Halloween, I've seen cedar hedges go up in Vancouver with fireworks and other things. So when these things catch on fire, you don't want to be around them. Changing the structure, well, obviously, the most important part is your roofing. So if you have rated roofing, according to Cohen, who's the leading researcher in the U.S. Forest Service, you have an 85% chance of surviving an ember shower. Next is your building exterior siding material. So ideally it's not wood, or it's larger wood members. Balconies and decks. If you have open decks that flame or embers can get underneath the deck, that's not a good thing, so you should sheath your deck in. And we talked about it earlier about combustible materials. We don't want to have a bunch of combustible materials right next to the home. So exterior buildings, stone, vinyl, concrete. There's all kinds of alternative materials that you can put in your house or that are part of your building design that mitigate the vulnerability of fire. The subdivision, or the strata lots that I saw today, most of the homes were actually FireSmart. They had metal roofing, they were constructed with hardy board or some other exterior member that was fire resistant. There were only a couple of homes that really were vulnerable in a big way. So that was pretty impressive, to be honest. There are some materials, if you do have wood, there is some materials that you can spray on or put on that reduce the flammability of that material. So I do a lot of work on permitting for homes being built in North End District. We often have a lot of developers that still want to have wood aesthetic look. If you don't If you put less than 20% on, we don't force you to treat it. If you go more than 20%, then we force you to treat it, and you have to prove you treat it by providing us with the label and the bill of the purchased retardant.
Can you treat something that's already up?
Yes, yes.
So if we were restaining, we could,
Yes, you can treat restain. So you can pressure wash and restain. It's not cheap. It's quite expensive stuff. It's like $50 a gallon, and it doesn't go very far. It's not like paint, but it does work, particularly if you're talking about cedar or something like that. Here's an example of what happens when cedar burns. That's cedar hedging in Southern California 2 years ago. So Roman candles, you can see that the flame height is almost as tall as the actual shrub itself. If that's next to your house and your house isn't, if your house hasn't got FireSmart materials, look out. Note that this was burning on December 5th. It wasn't very warm. It was probably 24 degrees, 22 degrees, which for California is not that warm. So the other thing is compliant landscaping. So ideally, this is a house from Cortez. He thought he was doing a really good job of fire smarting his property. He put gravel all through here. This was all cedar mulch. So as soon as an ember hits this, it's going to burn. This is all open. There was mulch all underneath here. As soon as the embers get underneath here, it's underneath the wood deck, and boom, the house is lost. This is a nice wood house. The vegetation, the actual trees that he left, are reasonable, but in too close a proximity to the house. I would have liked to have seen maybe this tree gone. He could have kept those two. That tree should have gone. I mean, a lot of this is aesthetic pleasure, and people want trees around their home. I'm not telling them to cut every tree, but you got to use common sense around which one you're going to leave, which one you're going to take. And the 10 meters doesn't have to be absolutely cleansed of trees, but notice he's raised the crowns. You want them off the roof. You want them high enough that you're not moving flames up into the trees. This is pretty good, except the landscaping and the ability for embers to go underneath it. The other thing I should point out is he had propane bottles right on the side of the house. These are kinds of hedging and materials that we don't want around houses, particularly these large, tall hedges. And these occur all over the coast. And I said it earlier that juniper is really a nasty piece of business if it starts to burn. You've got the option, if you really think you're fire prone and you really want to reduce your risk, you can think about putting a sprinkler system on your roof. Generally very cheap. They're not that expensive. The most expensive part is the pump. You need to make sure you can gas them up for several hours, like 10 to 12 hours. Ideally, I don't recommend electrical because often electrical goes down during a fire event. Most of Bowen is serviced by a distribution line that's on wood poles. A significant fire event here is going to take the power down. So if you're relying on power, you're not going to be able to service a sprinkler. So a gas pump, simple hose system, and then a storage cistern of water is really going to be what allows you to set the system up and sprinkle your home. So think about creating a dome over your home of misted water that when those embers come in, they hit that dome of water and they're no longer burning, and they're not gonna light on your structure. The thought of some homes wanting to do their own ability to put out small fires on their property, water storage, a pump, a hose, and that way if you got a small fire, you can potentially attack it with that hose system. There's others that have dry hydrants, other things, but those require maintenance and are unreliable in my opinion because most people don't pay enough attention to maintaining them. So, but there's a number of options you can build into that protection plan that you have for your property. Ideally, you're limbing lower branches of large conifers in that zone, so you can have them on your property, but you don't want them in close contact to your roof. I usually prescribe 5 meters off the roof. Ideally, you've got the crowns raised up high. You have no surface fuel on the ground. And at least you're maintaining some ecosystem services by maintaining the odd tree in that 10-meter zone. You can also do things like crown thinning. So this was a very dense tree. These folks did not want to take it down. They wanted it in close proximity to their house. So the first pass, we had them crown thin it, and then we raised the crown up to about here. So there's different options to treat the trees in that space. you know, if you really have to have them, that will reduce some of that risk. This is an area in, what's the misspelled? It's Highlands, near Victoria. So this was a very dense Douglas fir forest like this, that this development was done in. We had been putting in a water system and dry hydrants with the fire department. This is what it looked like before, and afterwards we maintained all the arbutus and the rock garden areas. But you can see here you got really good defensible space, and you can see here that the house is actually FireSmart. So this is development that still maintained the integrity of the forest environment that the developer was trying to achieve, but it wasn't what a lot of developments are doing, is building the forest right up to the homes. These things called eco-clusters, high density stands next to home, are a fire nightmare, and I'm on a campaign to wipe them out. I do not believe they're safe. They're entrapping people, and these homes will not survive a forest fire. We cannot keep building that, because that's adding to the interface building stock that's vulnerable to interface fire. So another home, this is on Saturna. Again, he did a really good job of building a FireSmart home, but he put it on a slope, and he wasn't thinking about the vegetation. It all came to 2-meter grass, and the slope was right next to the road, and the house is actually sprinkled. He has a sprinkler system built into the home. It's probably about a $1.5 million home, and the sprinkler system is serviced by this cistern underneath the deck. Very well thought out, but he didn't think about, after he cleared the lot, what kind of vegetation he was going to have, and this vegetation comes right underneath this deck, and it's not enclosed, and this would start the deck on fire. Somebody threw a cigarette on this grass in the summer. Again, you can see this home's got all this chipped material and mulch. You saw what happened in FireSmart, where all that ember fell down. A good quality house, but again, it's got an open deck underneath here and vulnerable to fire. Here's some really nice landscaping, mostly herbaceous or shrubbery that's not going to burn. The trees are well away from the house. There's nothing wrong with a deciduous tree in that 10-meter fire zone, because deciduous doesn't burn like a coniferous tree does. So if we get into 30-meter zone, here's an example where we got some fuel right next to the building. We don't want to do that. Really what we want to do is thin the tree crown so that fire won't come off the ground. So we prune 2 to 3 meters, and we want to make sure all that down wood on the ground is cleaned up. So that's the zone 2. And here's an example of that Highlands development, and these are those zones around each of the house on each of the lots. Still maintaining the integrity of the wetlands and the trees in the wetlands. Some trees close to the house, but generally the forest was all treated and mitigated for the hazard before that was got council approval. So essentially there was defensible space on all of the homes, and there was a number of water sources that were created as part of the development, so that there was the ability to actually address the fire. And there was evacuation in 2 directions, one out this way and one out that way. So we avoid the single evacuation egress, and that evacuation road is clear of trees so that there's not that potential for fire to affect the evacuation egress. Other elements, so we've talked about access, and we don't want these dead end turnarounds or dead end T's. And the other thing is we want to make sure that the chimneys and fireplaces and or stoves are well off the rooftop, so they're not going to start the roof on fire. All of this is in the FireSmart material that's available here or online. So I'm really duplicating a lot of that material. So again, I talked about the surface fuel. This is enough surface fuel on the ground to spread fire through the forest. This is the kind of stuff, this fine material is what we want to clean up. I don't care about the big stuff. Anything over 6 inches is not a hazard compared to this fine fuel material. So if you're thinking about cleaning up the woody material around your home, you're really focused on the stuff that's less than 6 inches in diameter. If it's surrounded by this kind of stuff, a match into this and some wind and poof, it moves well and quickly with a lot of heat along the surface. Here's some example, heavy cedar component and thinned to a crown density where there's a very small likelihood that that's going to support a crown fire. Again, another development with different hazards. So in this case, you notice that these homes have the greatest hazard. They're on a slope. There's a forested park below here, Golden Todd Park. And because of that, once we did this hazard assessment, we put in a field break along this side of the, so these are subdivision level things that you can do to mitigate some of that risk overall to the entire subdivision. So again, I've talked about it. Evacuation is a major consideration. We've really come to learn in the last couple of years. This is probably one of the fundamental things we're failing on in terms of community development. All over the place you find communities that got this single access, and unincorporated communities are probably the worst because there's no focus on this at all. And there's a big risk of entrapment. So here's an example, Squamish-Lillooet District. All of these communities have virtually no access in and out of it. So we want to try and stop this kind of development because sooner or later, we've had several incidents, 2 years ago, where 70 people were almost entrapped in a park near Rock Creek. And we had a couple of examples last year where people were nearly entrapped in some very difficult fire conditions. So what to do? Well, ideally, you want to do what this community is doing. Starting making some chipping available to residents who want to deal with their own material on their own, and that neighborhoods band together to start doing their own FireSmart treatments, which is what we were talking about today. Which trees to remove, which trees to keep. Is there too much fuel in the ground? Should we be removing more? And the strata that I visited today is banding together to do their own contribution in terms of their own ability to do work and probably spend some of their own money looking after their property. So obviously, I won't get into this, but most communities are doing their own thing on Crown land to try and reduce and mitigate the risk. But I think it's important that, so you've got this strategy to protect the community on a larger scale, and that's the fire department's duty. But really, I can't emphasize how important it is. We can do all this till we're blue in the face unless you start focusing on your individual property. We're not really going to have an effect on this whole issue. So that concludes my presentation, and with the large numbers of people we've had to the last one, the dialogue's gone on all night, so it'll be interesting to see how long the dialogue goes on tonight. So, any questions, comments? Tomatoes? Yes?
So BC Hydro comes and trims the trees and sort of horribly prunes them,
Yes.
and then they bush and hang over the road. So should we be encouraging them to take them down rather than creating the pruning that causes them to bush?
You should be encouraging them to improve your evacuation egress rather than littering it with dense, shrubby trees right on the road right away. But I didn't say that publicly. Yes?
Sort of the question now is the municipality considering and concerned about all the one-way roads on the island? Are we looking at some point in the long-term future doing some connections or providing alternative routes?
I don't know about building new roads because we don't own a lot of land necessarily to build them on, but evacuation planning is certainly something, and how people will get out is being looked at.
Good, good. Well, I had the question we talked about earlier is sort of resources for all this. The expertise in sprinkler systems and that sort of thing, water catchment facilities and all that. I found it difficult trying to get help on that. I know there's sprinkler systems out there and stuff, but then we really need somebody who knows how to use them appropriately and set them up and that.
So there are a few individuals, but as I said, they're not easily engaged, and I'm happy to provide you with some names, and I can make that available to the fire department here as well. Absolutely.
So, what if I'm gonna try to improve my FireSmart list, which is pretty low? after
You're vulnerable.
pretty much I had all of the mistakes, except the GPL, the propane tanks. I had all of them.
Okay.
But anyways, okay, I learned the lesson before it's too late. Now I'm gonna improve my FireSmart scale, bringing up to 10. That's it. My neighbors want, and they are way closer to my home than the trees.
Shame them. Publicly shame them. No, I mean, I think really it's an issue of educating them and getting them to understand some of this, the principles of this. If they're really running their home down and they've got a bunch of stuff that's vulnerable, flammable, then, you know, the only thing you can do is try to educate them. I don't have a real solution to that, especially if they're in close proximity. I mean, that's a problem that occurs all over BC. One neighbor manicures their house perfectly, and the next one runs a junkyard dog. You know, but you can't. You have to first start your own example, and then hopefully convince them that there is significant risk and that they should do something.
If it's junkyard, we've got an unsightly premises file.
Yeah, I think it's more trees close to the house and underlying brush and all that stuff. Yeah.
So you have a property line and you share that dense vegetation?
Yeah. Even the property line is the issue.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
looking intensely at the wood boards. They
Yeah.
can catch on fire because they are so old, so dry
Yeah, yeah.
that even the fence is a concern right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
That's a difficult issue.
that's
The house looks like it's made of kindling.
Mhm.
It's that dry.
Really. Old cedar house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Never treated, never stained, just all that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the one that'll take the whole island down.
Oh,
If
you're
it
very
gets
full
going.
of.
Well, if it gets going. Anyway.
Social media, it's a shame.
Yeah.
The spray-on treatment for wood cladding, you like
Yes.
recommend a particular product, or is there a bunch of different?
There's a couple on the market, but I mean, there's one that primarily is the one. I mean, if you leave me your name and stuff, I can send you the details of it. It comes out of the U.S. You have to bring it in.
Oh.
So nobody locally like Cloverdale?
I don't
or
think
any of those
so.
people
It's
stock
not
any of that
easily
stuff?
sourced. You have to order it. So, but we've got probably 10 or 12 developers in North Van that have used it, and they're happy with it. They all whine that it's expensive, but they're at least they can put wood finishing on that the district's accepted. So, and it seems to be endorsed product. It comes from the States because it's being widely used down there.
And you can actually.
You can paint it, you can stain it.
You have to paint.
You can spray it, or you can use a brush and apply
But
it.
it's a stain, not a
It-
paint.
Yeah, it's a stain.
Oh, okay.
Okay, like it's for cedar shakes or cedar siding or cedar members,
Yeah.
and it's basically a wood stain.
And it lasts, what, 10 years or something?
I think it's a resin and it penetrates the wood pores and basically, and it's got at least a 10-year lifespan. Yeah.
And would you do this for logs as well, or not?
I don't think you need to do logs. As soon as you get to big members, they're not as vulnerable, right? They're not likely to start on fire. So
Is that the same stuff as they would spray on the cedar roofs?
the stuff they spray on the cedar roof is largely to reduce mildew and mold and algae.
Oh, I thought
And-
it was a fire retardant.
No, to my knowledge, they say there's fire-resistant shakes, but nobody's certified shakes to last more than 10 years in the weather environments that we get. Like the idea is that they penetrate the pores like we've talked about, but the resins break down in a short period of time, so you can't get a CSA certified fire-resistant shake to my knowledge. Any of you ever heard of it?
Well,
They're out
I
there.
have heard of them, but they do say UV breaks them
Yes,
down. So
yeah,
depending
and so
on
no
the
one,
part.
CSA
So-
hasn't certified
Yeah.
it.
But they give like a 5-year lifespan on them.
Yeah.
They said depending on where the climate how much sun, UV on it, it'll break down a lot faster if it's in too dry or
And
shady
they're-
area or something like that.
They're super expensive, and there's other cheaper products that are rated for sure. So I wouldn't recommend them. I'm not an advocate for the shake industry.
It's basically just the metal roof and the asphalt shingles? Or
Yeah, well, asphalt, metal, torch on, the rubber roof, which I saw a couple of today, and even Durite, simple Durite, all are rated.
Simple Durite's the cheapest of all of those.
Yes. Other questions?
So when you're talking about the amber showers
Yes.
coming down, so
Yes.
the bigger your overhang, the better it would be maybe?
Yeah, if you
They
have a
won't-
big soffit, it's gonna keep the embers, but don't forget the embers come from all directions.
Yeah.
So you're not eliminating, a bigger overhang doesn't eliminate the embers from penetrating the side of the house, as you saw in that ember shower simulation. And really, when you get a big fire, you usually have a bigger wind, and that is blowing the embers in all directions. So,
If anyone is interested in getting their house or their area fire smarted or having someone, Jen McGowan and myself have taken our FireSmart certification. So we come and do that for free. We're having free chip days where we can bring a chipper. So there's a few incentives to get that done.
Yeah.
So
So how do we sign up for that?
if you have your name there on there, and we
Put
can
an
get a
email
hold of you.
address, yeah.
Yeah, and then Jan and I'll get a hold of you and we'll work all that out.
So we should get that phone number on there as well or something like that?
Sure, yeah, phone number, email, whatever, yeah.
okay. Other questions?
Decking for outdoor patio deck, treated wood or?
I mean, if you sheath in the deck so stuff can't come from underneath.
So it's more from underneath?
Yeah,
and
it's more from
embers
underneath. It gets
dropping
into
on
the
top.
corners. The embers get into the corners and they start the corner on fire. Embers landing on a cedar deck. Excuse me. Excuse me. Cedar deck.
That's not allowed.
No, I hope it is.
I'm gonna walking around in the rain all afternoon.
Yeah, I got pneumonia now. No, I mean the embers are coming down, and they land on a big wood member. Chances are they're not going to start that wood member on fire. It's when they can get into a crack or a smaller space that they generate the heat that starts it on fire. So, I mean, if you've got cedar decking, you want to have it tight. You don't want a big quarter, half-inch gap. You want it tight so that ember can't get down in there. I mean, preferably you're going to treat it if you're going to use cedar, or I mean, even something like Trex is a better option from a fire point of view. That vinyl, it's not a great product. It wears kind of not so good in time, but it can be cleaned and it's good. It's from a rot point of view, you're not going to get any rot, and it's not vulnerable to ember showers. But whether I'd go that far in this climate, I'd probably do that in the interior before I did it here. More questions?
We're doing another one of these on April 28th at 3 p.m. So tell your friends, neighbors, tell your neighbors.
Are you gonna do it at Union Hall?
I'll sign up for that.
Yeah, no
Are you
kidding.
gonna do it here or do it at Municipal Hall so it's handier for the other side of the island?
I think I'd like to do it at Municipal Hall simply because on the 28th we're doing a driving pumping course here.
Okay.
So, but I'll let Jennifer know because right now I think on the web it says at Satellite Hall too. So, but we'll switch it to the Municipal Hall so to let anyone else know.
And the third event is on May 6th
May 6th.
at 7 p.m.
And that will probably have the Municipal Hall also.
This is really informative, and I've been to your two other presentations, and you're changing some things up.
Well, I learned stuff even again last year. Well, you read the literature, you look at California. This is a changing dynamic field, and you got to be on top of it all the time.
So the bylaws in North Van, are they for just certain areas or?
Yeah, it really isn't an area of high risk. immediately against the interface and it encompasses about 3,100 homes. So
So-
any home that gets rebuilt in that stock of 3,100 has to, I mean, basically if you do a renovation that opens X percentage of the building envelope, or you build a new home, you have to go through the DPA permitting process, which means you have to get a FireSmart plan done, and the development has to meet that plan. So it's actually on the web if you want to Google it. You can,
I remember Richard Walton
yeah,
and everything.
yeah,
And the vinyl siding,
yeah.
you referred to as being okay, but in that first
No,
video.
vinyl siding is not ideal.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
No,
One
no.
video
You want
had the vinyl siding.
the hardy board is really the best product that's out there right now. It's more expensive, but it's not vulnerable to fire.
And what about stucco?
Stucco is fine. Yeah, stucco is another rated product. Some form of stone,
Yeah.
stucco, hardy board, all those products are FireSmart.
Stuck on this climate's not the best.
No,
but-
Well, it depends if it's done properly, because think about some of those old houses in Dunbar that are 75 years old and
I lived in one of those.
Yeah. But, they're still standing.
But all
there.
those good Italians are dead by now, so.
Okay.
The house that I had in Italy was over 300 years old, and trust me, it doesn't go anywhere for the next 300. That's the whole business, so.
Good.
Was it built out of stone?
Yeah, really.
Good stone.
The important wall, the big one, I think it's 1.20 meters wide,
Oh, wow.
and that's not concrete. That's solid rock mixed with concrete and who else inside. There was, sorry. We used to put people in the cement pillar in the past. Not that I'm aware of. They did in the past. So, thing is, so I guess with older building, you have to deal with what you have, and you have to reach a compromise.
You do. But
I won't be able to shield my deck.
no.
That has been built without logic, and that's what I have. My deck, everything. My dog can access underneath the deck.
So you can't put plywood sheathing around it?
Yeah, but what about the top? The
plants.
spacing between
Yeah,
the
yeah.
boards.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah, yeah.
half
So,
an inch.
so the cheap alternative is to buy a sprinkler system. Like all you need is a rainbird, put it on your roof, have it ready to go during the fire season. $300-400, you can set yourself up with a sprinkler.
Could you set up a lawn sprinkler on your deck?
You could,
You
of
know, one of
course.
those old oscillating ones?
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
But I mean, better to create better from the roof,
from the
Yeah.
roof.
and that you wet down the whole building envelope. Okay.
You know what the radius is for those things?
They easily cover a house, the big rainbirds, especially if you get them, you put them on a triangle or on the top of your roof peak, and they go like 25 meters around. Yeah, they go a long way if you have decent pressure. I mean, it comes back to pressure. Yeah,
25 meters?
yeah, you can get them. They'll go as far as 25 meters. So
I can see Dennis rushing out to get one,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
yeah, the good ones.
Well, that's what I'm looking for.
And you want a
Something
decent
like
pump too.
that. Yes.
So
And a water
Yeah.
source.
but I've been dealing with ranchers, and they've been looking at sprinkler systems for barn systems and all those kind of things, and they're out there for sure. So anyway, okay.
Well,
Thank you very much for coming.
showing
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I better go sign that list.
Sign that.